and welcome back to the UK SIF Leadership Podcast. It is still just about May 2024. I'm Liza Hartley, Media Relations Manager at UK SIF, and on today's podcast, we will be looking at the Financial Conduct Authority's Sustainability Disclosure Requirements, also known as SDR. The Financial Conduct Authority, also known as the FCA, published its final rules on UK SDR and investment labels on the 28th of November 2023. The package of regulation includes, in brief, an anti-greenwashing rule, 4 distinct voluntary sustainable investment labels, consumer-facing disclosures, detailed pre-contractual and ongoing entity and product-level disclosures, naming and marketing rules for funds, and additional rules to apply specifically to distributors in the UK. UK SIF and PwC have today published a collaborative report examining the challenges and opportunities for firms when it comes to implementing this package of regulation and setting out some key advice and insights into how to get the best outcome for their organisation. With me is Head of Policy and Regulatory Affairs at UK SIF, Oscar Warwick-Thompson. Oscar, good afternoon.
Hi, Liza.
And today we're hugely fortunate to be joined by Lucas Penfold, Senior Manager in PwC's Sustainability team. In his work at PwC, Lucas is primarily focused on ESG and sustainable finance, including the Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulation, the Green Taxonomy, and TCFD. Before joining PwC, Lucas actually worked at the Financial Conduct Authority and HM Treasury before that. Lucas, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Liza. Good to be here.
I would like to start by giving our listeners a bit of context. So, can you give us a brief overview of the purpose of the SDR report and how did this come together? Should I begin with you, Oscar?
Yeah, sure, Liza. And just to say, really pleased to get this report out there. It's been a real pleasure to work with Lucas and the PwC team on this. It's a lot of hard work that's gone into it. So really looking forward to now socialising this with our members and FCA and other stakeholders as well. There's really kind of twofold purpose to our report that we've launched today. One is really around analysing the latest challenges facing asset managers and other market participants across the industry. We felt this is really important given this is the first crucial year of implementation of the SDR requirements. It's very much the first regime of its kind globally. And also we thought it was worth looking at the challenges given that defining sustainability, including sustainable investments, has been really challenging in jurisdictions such as the EU and others as well. So a key purpose of the report is really to identify some of those common challenges that are facing our asset manager members and others as well. Also, a second key purpose of the report is crucially looking at potential solutions to some of those challenges that we've identified in the report. So really looking at kind of constructive recommendations that firms can seek to draw on in their implementation journey over the coming months. Our recommendations cover many different parts of this SDR package, from the fund labels to product governance considerations, some of the disclosure requirements as well at the entity and product level, and also the anti-greenwashing rule and guidance as well. And I think we'll go into a bit more detail in our conversation, Liza, about some of those recommendations across those areas. So broadly speaking, we hope this will be helpful and informative for asset managers and other firms impacted by the rules, and of course as well the FCA, and hopefully this will be helpful in giving them the market's perspective, for the regulators to draw on going forward.
That's great. Lucas, can I bring you in on that?
Yeah, no, I agree with that, Oscar. I think with something like SDR, there's a lot of complexity around the package of measures that the FCA's introduced, and in large parts, I think it's fair to say it's quite a principles-based regime. So, I think one of the things that UK SIF and PwC were really keen to try to do with the report that's out today is produce something that's going to be helpful for firms starting on their implementation journeys. And really getting into some of the practicalities around, common hurdles and to Oscar's point, putting out some ideas around how some of those challenges can be overcome.
Fantastic. Thank you both. We've heard mention from each of you about some challenges here. I wonder if we can dive into those a little bit more. I'd like to give our listeners an idea. What do you think are some of the biggest challenges or the latest challenges facing the industry when it comes to SDR? And then how confident are you that we can overcome them? What does the report have to say as far as, how the UK can learn from, for example, SFDR in the EU and other regimes, please? Oscar, can we begin with you again?
Yeah, sure. So I guess a key theme that runs throughout the report that we've done is around this, which Lucas referred to, is the fact that this is very much a principles-based regime. We very much welcome that in comparison to other frameworks like the EU's SFDR. But I think, still, while welcome, it has brought with it a number of challenges. So the mantra from the regulator has been very much say what you do, then do what you say. And I think the fact this is a more disclosures-focused approach, more market-driven, may lead to more subjectivity creeping into the regime. And we note that in many areas of the report. And there is that possibility that we see of uneven implementation. And really, that's why we want to produce this report, to address some of those uneven implementation points that we might see from across the market. I think there's also a challenge around consumer and client understanding as well. And again, that's weaved into different parts of our report that we've released. So, how exactly do we feel that clients, and particularly we're talking about kind of retail savers, how do we feel they're going to interact with this regime? To what extent are they going to understand the sustainability labels that are laid out in the SDR package in practice? And also, what's the role of distributors as well? We talk a lot in the report about the need for asset managers to start those initial conversations and that initial engagement with distributors as soon as possible. So yes, to what extent do we feel that clients will receive the appropriate advice and signposting from their financial advisors? So I think those are kind of two broader challenges. Maybe a third one as well is this question of how do all these different regulations, how does this all kind of tie in together? And we talk a lot about in the report around interoperability of different standards. And by that, we really mean compatibility of different requirements. So there's the question, I think, of how does the SDR exactly interact with the EU SFDR? We talk a lot about that in the report. We talk about other regulations as well. And I think if we're looking at the UK specifically, there is that question of, I guess, where is the other parts of the SDR regime in place for other parts of the economy? It's worth remembering that actually SDR, taken as a whole, is an economy-wide regime that was laid out by the UK government during, or I think it was ahead of COP26. So yeah, we've got the FCA SDR part of that regime for asset managers, but we're still missing the corporate side of things. So yeah, there's that question of, to what extent do we feel that participants reporting against the SDR regime will be able to report in an efficient way if some of those kind of corporate disclosures are still missing in the economy. So yeah, those are some kind of broader challenges that are kind of, I think, tied in throughout the report. In terms of your question, Liza, how confident can we be? I won't say we're very, very confident, but I think we can say we are confident that we can overcome some of the challenges that are laid out in the report. There is certainly a lot more work to be done by groups like UK SIF, the FCA and others, and I definitely think there is a role for membership associations like UK SIF to play alongside the FCA as well. But yeah, I might hand over to Lucas to talk a bit more about some of the more specific recommendations that we've outlined.
Yeah, and actually, just sort of on the challenges point there, I mean, I agree with those points, Oscar, but I think, one of the big themes that's been coming out through the work we've been doing, and particularly some of the member interviews that we conducted, was around sort of the fund labelling piece. And I think, Oscar, you mentioned sort of the sort of interoperability related challenges, some of the differences with other regimes like SFDR, for example. And I think it's quite common for firms to have funds and that are in scope of both of those different regulations. I think that's definitely a theme that comes up a lot. So with the conversations I have with clients, and that's something I think firms are quite nervous about. And then there are some sort of specific points around fund labelling. So for example, the 70% threshold for sustainable investments across each label. What's the evidence-based standard that should be used to make that assessment? How does that 70% threshold apply across different asset classes? So funds of funds, I think, are an example that we hear quite a lot about, where there's a particular challenge. And the improvers label in particular is something we hear a lot about. And one of the points that's been made sort of frequently by a number of firms is, well, what will happen when improver label funds improve, if you like? So the assets held within those funds, once the improvements have been realised, what happens to the status of those? Do you have to
get rid of those?
Exactly, Liza. So yeah, there are all sorts of sort of practical challenges that I think the industry is still working through and grappling with. Yeah,
with funds sort of switching from Article 8 to Article 9 and then back again.
Yeah, I think that the point you make, Lucas, on funds of funds is really interesting. I guess it's that kind of I'm conscious I'm making very broad broad comments in this part of the session, but I guess it's the fact that, do we feel that actually this regime can fit very nicely for a mix of different strategies beyond just actively managed listed equity funds? And I think there is often that bias in regulations like the SFDR where that can fit for active managed listed equity funds, but actually if we're talking about kind of private markets focused funds, and you mentioned Lucas funds of funds, how do we make sure these rules and other requirements in other countries can actually work for different types of strategies as well? So I think that's an area which the FCA has really grappled with, and I think they've been honest about that, and it's come up in other conversations with international policymakers too.
Fantastic. Two very big questions there. I'm glad we've covered that. Let's move to having a look at. I'd like to know what are some of the report's recommendations specifically for firms to consider drawing on in their implementation plans over this year. How should this first year of implementation be approached by managers? Lucas, can I begin with you?
Yeah, sure. So I think the report has 10 recommendations at last count, so I won't go through all of those. but I think there are definitely some sort of key themes coming through the recommendations that the report contains. And I think the big message for me is around sort of viewing SDR implementation through a strategic lens rather than purely a compliance lens, particularly in light of some of those challenges that we touched on around interoperability, for example. So I think that sort of plays out in a couple of ways. So if I think about fund labelling, for example, my view, what's going to be really important is taking a strategic view around your product development decisions and your product governance. So, in practice, this means recognising the differences across some of those different regulatory regimes, SFDR, SDR, what the US SEC is doing with the fund naming guidance, for example, and then developing products that are ultimately driven by your own house view rather than purely through regulation alone. Because otherwise, I think you just run that risk of having to maintain multiple fund ranges just to comply with specific regulatory frameworks, rather than actually developing products that make commercial sense for your organisation. So I think definitely, there's a sort of strategic lens to apply to sort of decisions around fund labelling and product strategy more broadly. And then on disclosure and reporting, actually, we didn't really sort of get into this that much around the challenges, but I'm very conscious that actually there's, as the name suggests, sustainability disclosure requirements. It's not just a labelling regime. There's also a big sort of disclosure and reporting element to this, and I think because there's been a lot of focus on the labelling, sometimes that can get a little bit lost actually. And again, I think there's a strategic approach to be played, to be taken when thinking about some of those rules. So, for example, how can you be thinking about common data points across different regulations? So, there will be common data points that you need to report against under SFDR. There will be, that some of those data points will be needed for some of the annual SDR reporting obligations. Yeah. And really, I think taking that slightly more strategic view of how you gather data and map that to multiple different regulations that you're in scope of, can really drive efficiencies in the way that's collected and structured for reporting purposes. And there's also just a point for me around, if you're putting out all of this new reporting that the SDR is going to be requiring, how can you use that to really support the message you want to be making as a firm, as an organisation on sustainability? So mapping that reporting through to your sort of broader corporate message on sustainability, and really sort of pushing that through the narrative. And actually, we touched on principles-based approaches that the FCA has taken here. I think that does provide firms with some flexibility to really try and use this as an opportunity to kind of push their narrative on sustainability. So I think there's a real opportunity for firms there.
Fantastic. Yeah, an opportunity to display leadership, an opportunity to take a sort of strategic approach to some of the efficiency gains. Oscar, can I bring you in on that question?
Yeah, absolutely. I guess in terms of touching on, the question of how should managers approach this first year of implementation, Lucas has artfully laid out our core recommendations across the report. I guess some other kind of observations to bring in is around collaboration. We think it's really important for firms to speak to peers in the industry, of course, engage with groups like UK SIF, and there'll be other organisations out there as well who are doing some really good work in terms of guidance that can support firms on their implementation journey. There's been another number of reports out this year from other groups, and we see very much this report out today as complementary to those other efforts across the industry. I think also separately to collaboration, I would say absolutely, talk to your clients, speak to them, regularly engage with them. Don't make assumptions. I've often kind of will say that. We did another report a few years ago during Good Money Week, and that actually found that it's the older generation of the UK public who want to invest their money in line with their values, and that really challenges the perception that's all about the young people, millennials, who are interested in investing in a sustainable way. So yeah, it's about don't make those assumptions of what your clients think, and really look to survey them rigorously on their sustainability preferences, and that could be done through bespoke surveys and other ways as well. So yeah, I think this all points to what the FCA has said in terms of viewing SDR in the context of the consumer duty and consumer protection, and really think about how can retail savers best understand the regime. Maybe one final point to add is actually speak to the FCA. I think they are open for engagement. We've had some really good conversations with FCA. We really value the dialogue that we have with them. So yeah, I would say to one of our members and other firms, do reach out to them, do speak to them, and also I would say look at the guidance webpage that's on their website as well. That's been up for a few months.
Super useful. Okay, how do we see SDR evolving in that case? I want to think. We've touched on the first year of implementation. What happens next? And also, how might FCA's approach develop as well? Oscar, can we start with you?
Yeah, sure. So, yeah, I won't make any hard and fast predictions because, yeah, obviously don't want to look silly if we play this back at some point in time. But on a serious point, this is, a fast evolving space. Things are changing all the time. So, yeah, I definitely see the need for further reports like this going forward. And I'm sure there'll be other groups that will look to contribute to this debate as well. I think if I am kind of throwing a prediction kind of out there,
Go on.
why not? My sense is more and more funds will qualify and fall under scope of the regime. And to be honest, that's a pretty conservative, I think, prediction to make, given that this has been mentioned in the PS that came out last year. So, portfolio management services will be captured in scope. That consultation is ongoing. Overseas funds also will be caught in scope, and that consultation, I think, is planned for the third quarter of this year. And also pensions products as well will be caught too. So yeah, we can safely say, I think, that more and more products in the market will be caught by the SDR requirements. In terms of the regulator's role going forwards, I can't really comment, I guess, on kind of, what exactly they might do, but in terms of kind of what I'd like to see, I think certainly looking to identify good practice in the market would be really important, and taking that supportive approach to implementation. I think updating their guidance webpage that I mentioned a few minutes ago will be really important. Members come to us and others groups all the time with lots of different questions on the intent and some of the detail behind what was laid out in the policy statement. So yeah, absolutely, if the FCA can look to update this guidance webpage on its website pretty frequently throughout the year, I think that would also be much valued.
Yeah, and it makes sense. And I think at the risk of speculating slightly, I think with a big regime like this, clearly the FCA has put a lot of hard work into this, and sort of developed its thinking on the approach over a number of years now, based on how it tends to approach other sort of big regulations like this. That inevitably there will be a shift towards supervisory work at some point. So yes, I think to Oscar's point, there's lots of new policy change and further developments to the regime, and it will evolve over the coming sort of months and years. But I think there will be a shift towards how effectively are firms implementing it and complying with the regime. Really to sort of, I guess, try and identify sort of good and bad practices across the industry, and use that to sort of drive expectations.
If I can, finally, actually, what are the opportunities in that case that SDR represents for the industry as a whole? And if I can get a little bit of perhaps a view from you both on how confident you are for the future. We're as we've already touched on, we're on the cusp of a period of immense change now, and I'd like to know do you think we're ready? What do you see as being kind of the prospects? Does the future look bright? Lucas, can we begin with you?
Yeah, good question. Big question. So I mean, in terms of opportunities, I think for me there are probably sort of two parts to this, and I guess I've kind of alluded to both of them actually already in the discussion today. I think there's definitely a piece around sort of product development related opportunities, and also opportunities around sort of reporting and controlling your sustainability narrative and story as an organisation. So, if I take the product development piece first, I think, some firms that we've spoken to through the work that we've done for this report, they have said actually at this point they're not that clear what the demand for labelled products will be. Sure. I think there's still a bit of a question mark out there in the market. I think some firms are quite confident on that point, but others are in some sort of wait and see mode. My personal view is that I think the broader macro trends, so whether that's evolving societal expectations around tackling climate change, an interesting, it sounds like Oscar and I could have a bit of a debate around the intergenerational wealth transfer to millennials and their appetite for ESG products. But I think those types of trends mean that there's, in my view, there's likely to be a sort of greater push for investment into sustainability marketed products over time. And if the SFDR classifications or anything to go by, we saw there was a lot of interest in Article 8 products, Article 9 products when SFDR was first launched, and there continue to be. So I think we're likely to see a sort of brand shape around the SDR labels which make those types of products attractive over time. And then on the reporting piece, this really comes back to that point I was making around telling your story, projecting your sustainability values as an organisation to investors and to wider stakeholders as well. Because I think these types of if you take the entity annual sustainability report that's required under SFDR, I think that will be consumed by a broader audience, not just investors in your fund. So I think there's a real opportunity there around how firms can sort of push some of that messaging around sustainability.
Yeah, just to add to Lucas's comments, I think there's a really important kind of international prize here for the UK in terms of influence in the design of regimes across the world. We've seen that the Commission's consultation on the SFDR regime, clearly that seems to be inspired from the thinking by the FCA's SDR. So I think, there are absolutely opportunities there to really shape what's going on internationally and really try to get a bit more compatibility built into all these regimes going forward. I think also separately to the international opportunities that I mentioned, I think there's the domestic prize as well in terms of really helping to guide investors and retail consumers in their decisions in the sustainable investment market, and really looking to, I guess, build more trust and confidence among this group in their investments. Obviously, there has been greenwashing in the market. We do have to acknowledge that, and these risks very much remain. How do we address some of these risks that are really hurting the confidence of clients and customers in the UK's market, and really seize the opportunities that the SDR regime can bring? There's also perhaps a point around the appetite from asset owners, and we work with a lot of asset owners among our membership in UK SIF. And actually, from kind of anecdotal conversations we've had with some of them, actually there does seem to be the demand from the asset owner parts of the asset owner community to have sustainable labelled funds. And I think that stems from the fact that they want to help demonstrate their sustainability credentials to their end beneficiaries. So it'll be interesting to see kind of how that conversation moves forward and what the appetite might be in the institutional market as well. But granted, the main focus at the moment is really from the view of retail savers, and that's kind of what the FCA has set out in its policy statement.
An exciting time to be in our space.
Yep.
And actually with that, we have reached the end of our time. Thank you both so much for your insights. Particular thanks to you, Lucas, for joining as our guest. The SDR report is out now and can be found on the UK SIF website on our policy page. You will also see it hopefully on LinkedIn. And thank you to everyone for tuning in. Remember to like and subscribe for more episodes in UK SIF news. You can find us on LinkedIn or Twitter at UK SIF. I hope you have a lovely rest of your day. You'll hear from us again very soon.